Cardinals reporter Jeff Jones joins us today to talk all things Cardinals, including the report that the Cardinals are still in talks with one team about Nolan Arenado.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily St. Louis Cardinals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Cardinals fans. I'm JD Hafford, and I'm your host for Locked On Cardinals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. You can follow me on Twitter X at JD Sports Radio and the podcast at LO_Cardinals. Want to thank those of you who make Locked On Cardinals your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube as well. Like, subscribe, and comment, and hit that notification button so you know when new episodes are posted. This is a show serving Cardinal Nation and giving the best fans in baseball all of the info about the birds on the bat. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. We've got Jeff Jones back with us today. Covers the Cardinals for the Belleville News-Democrat. You can find his work at bnd.com. Jeff, how are things in your world? Are you staying warm?
We're doing our best. You know, we went from 71 degrees on Monday to whatever the heck it is now with the freezing rain here on Wednesday, but I am something like 72 hours from being in Florida, so all things considered, I probably shouldn't complain too much.
Yeah, you'll fight through it so you can get out of town as quick as possible. The biggest story right now this offseason, obviously, has been the discussion of trading away Nolan Arenado. Priority 1, 2, and 3. We've heard all the quotes from Mo and how this is just something they want to get done. I know fans are exhausted about this topic. I get more pushback on this where they're like, dude, we're sick of this. Can we talk about something else? The problem is this is the top topic. This is the thing that is kind of sitting there just hanging over the head of the team right now. And, I'm sure the Cardinals, I'm sure Nolan Arenado, they're exhausted dealing with this as well. But with pitchers and catchers reporting in a week and the position players following right after that, many are wondering whether or not something is actually going to get done or not. Now, yesterday we got a report from MLB Network's John Paul Morosi that the Red Sox and Cardinals have had recent communication about a Nolan Arenado trade. Now, I don't know exactly what recent means because in my world, recent is like within the past month. But is there anything that you can shed on this subject? And what are your thoughts on whether or not a deal can or will get done before spring training begins?
Yeah, I wish I had something more illuminating to say. No, there's nothing. I'm glad that somebody told John Morosi. I think that's been reported for the last 3 months, and he just noticed. Congratulations to him, I guess. But no, look, as far as anyone can tell, there is not going to be progress on this front until Alex Bregman picks a team. And if that's the case, maybe that's today, maybe that's a week from today, maybe that's the middle of March. We have seen Boris guys drag into camp before. This is not necessarily new for him. The Cardinals' inability to figure out a different way to do this without requiring Bregman to sign, it says what it says about their front office and their ability to kind of get through an offseason. But it doesn't appear that there is going to be any movement on that front until there's any movement on the other one. And so, look, I get it. I understand that this has been hammered into the ground since probably October, honestly. But
Yeah.
what is there to? They have done nothing else. There's nothing else. They've done nothing. They've done nothing at all. And if their position is that that's not going to happen until this gets done, then that is what it is. I get that it doesn't make for the most exciting offseason or the most productive one for a team, but this is the path they've chosen, and this is what it looks like for now.
Now, if a deal doesn't happen, say we get to where position players are reporting, which what are we 12 days away from that happening? Nolan Arenado, would you expect him to come to camp on time, or is this something that possibly they'd be like, well, we're almost there, let's wait it out? Or do you think he shows up on time? And if that happens, how awkward are things going to be around camp with him being there?
They're not going to hold him out of camp. He's not going to stay home. He'll be in camp on time. If he's still on the roster on the 17th when pitchers and catcher, when position players due to report, then he'll be there, and we'll sort of see what goes from there. Is he going to be there any earlier? Who knows? Hard to say. I haven't heard on that either way, so it's possible. Look, I said I'm driving to Florida this weekend. I get to the complex for the first day next Monday, the 10th. And if I walk in on Monday and Nolan is at his locker, I'm not going to be floored. But I also don't expect that necessarily to happen either. I think that we'll see him on report day, assuming nothing happens between now and then, and they'll just go forward. In terms of awkwardness, like I think by and large his teammates get the score. I know by and large that his teammates don't fault him for anything that's going on, and it's just going to be what it is. I think that if we get to camp and there's no deal, then it's going to be waiting for a deal to happen during camp. And if it doesn't happen during camp, then I guess you put it back in the box until probably the deadline next winter. I don't know. Honestly, like I have a hard time understanding how it got this far. It is stunning to me that they let it bleed this far into the winter without figuring out a different path here. And I don't know what happens next because I didn't, for the life of me, could not have imagined that they would have let this drag on this long.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Alex Bregman signing, when or if that's going to happen. It seems like it's kind of down to a couple of different teams. Detroit seems to be a team that it has got the best deal on the table for him, and if that's the case, he can either choose that or he can choose what we've heard the Astros have offered him so far. In your eyes, do you still feel like if those are the two teams that Bregman might go to, do you feel like the Red Sox are still probably the best place for Arenado to land? Because we've also heard that maybe like the Royals might be a possibility, might be interested in him. But do you still feel like Boston would be the top spot for Nolan and for a deal to get done?
Look, what I would say is that the reporting all points in that direction. We know, is willing to accept a deal to the Red Sox. We know that they have had consistent conversations about it, and that there is probably a fit there to be had. So by default, I would assume that they would be, the, for lack of a better term, favorite in this situation. But I don't honestly know. It's entirely possible that somebody crops up at the 11th hour. If this bleeds into camp, people get hurt, people show up looking a certain way. Who can say? I think it's the Red Sox by default until something else reveals itself. I will say, in the event that another team does sort of pop out of the woodwork and there is reporting that suggests that there's something serious happening there, then it probably would jump to the front of the line, because to me, at this point in the offseason, if you were to jump in now, you would have to be serious, right? Like there's nobody calling on February 5th going, yeah, we didn't check in earlier. We were just curious. That's not happening. And so if you jump in or back in now, you're serious about it. And so maybe that's a team that skips to the front of the line.
And how about this scenario too? What if Nato's in camp? We've begun camp. Is there a possibility that he would still get traded after he already joins the team? Or do you think that would be something that they'd be like, all right, we're just going to move forward and you're going to be a part of this roster?
No, I think they'd be perfectly willing to trade him during spring if that's how it breaks down. Again, if Alex Bregman signs on February 22nd and on the 23rd somebody calls in and says, okay, we're going to get serious about Nolan now, the Cardinals will do it. The Cardinals do not want to pay his salary. The Cardinals want to clear his roster spot. They're not going to burn the roster down to do it. Like there are things that they're not going to accept here. They're not going to pay the whole ticket, right?
Sure.
But they want to move him. So when he shows up to camp, assuming that he gets there, okay, great. But that does not preclude him from being moved during spring training at all. The only thing I would say is that, for a deal like this, it would be super unusual for it to happen at a time that is not the off season or maybe the deadline, which is to say that if the season starts, then you're probably looking at Arenado in St. Louis likely until July.
All right. One of the key members of the team in 2025 is going to be Jordan Walker. And Jeff, you recently did a piece on him that I want to discuss next. We'll get into that next on Locked On Cardinals. The big game is almost here. There's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Basically, this is how it works. You pick more or less on at least two players' projections, and if you get it right, you could win up to 1,000x your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game, where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. They are giving you this victory. Pair that with one more correct pick and you're cashing out. Now, the ones that I've been eyeing up and on the app there is Xavier Worthy, They've got him with 57.5 receiving yards for the game. I think he clips that. I think he beats that. And it's hard not to go with Saquon Barkley rushing, receiving touchdowns at 0.5. And I know that Jalen Hurts does the tush push and gets in on the goal line a lot, but Barkley not scoring would shock me. So check out the promos tab to tail any of the Super Sweet Millie Winners big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Thanks again for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen every day. Leave your comments on YouTube as well as on Twitter X anytime you want. Your feedback is always welcome and encouraged. Jeff Jones joining us today, covers the Cardinals for the Belleville News Democrat. BND.com. If you haven't signed up to get his work, you're wasting time. You need to get on that. You just heard him talking about he's heading down to Florida. He is going to be at spring training covering everything going on with the Cardinals, so you don't want to miss out on all the info he's going to provide you. Jordan Walker was once the cream of the crop as far as hitters go in the eyes of a lot of scouts. Many had him touted as the top hitting prospect in baseball at one time, but things haven't quite gone as smoothly as everybody hoped since he made that opening day roster in 2023. And you recently did an article about Jordan at BND.com and what his impact can be for the team this year. In your opinion, is there any one player on this roster that is under more pressure and scrutiny to live up to the hype than Jordan is this year for the Cardinals?
That's an interesting question in terms of pressure and scrutiny, right? Because I would say that I do think that probably Nolan Gorman, for instance, is under a little more pressure and a little more scrutiny just in terms of where he is in the development curve. I would say that, arguably guys like Eric Fetty and Steven Matz, who are staring down the barrel of free agency, have a different kind of pressure on them. There's ways to look at it. But the thing that I would say, and the thing that I love that story with, is that there is no one that's going to be on the field for the Cardinals in 2025 that is more important than Jordan Walker, right? He's got to figure it out in order for this thing to sort of progress in the way that they have described, in order for them to succeed in pulling off a reset without having to ever call it a rebuild, all that good stuff. Jordan Walker has to hit. He's got to be a guy who hits in the middle of the lineup. And it's, that's just what it has to be. Is that entirely fair to Jordan? Maybe, kind of. Look, that's sort of what comes with it, right? And he has the skills to do that. He has the tools to do that. And certainly will put in the necessary work to do that. It's just going to be a matter of whether or not the tools that I think we've all kind of seen in fits and starts can manifest themselves more consistently. If he can make the kind of adjustments that you have to make to be that hitter of the big leagues, and if he can sort of get himself back to maybe the hitter he was in that winter between 22 and 23, when we had all sort of seen that breakout enormous minor league season that made him, one of the top prospects in all of baseball, going into a spring where, however they want to frame it now, the competition that was set up for Jordan Walker in spring of 23 was one that was set up for him to win. They expected him to make that team out of spring training from the day they got to Florida, right? And they were willing to create a circumstance to allow that to happen. So, that's the guy that they see. That's the guy that I see, frankly. That's the guy that I'm very confident that Jordan can be, will grow into. But he's got to show it now. This is his third season. It is coming to a point where if this year looks at all like last year, then maybe it's sort of time to reevaluate whether we were right about what kind of player we thought he could be.
What do you think the biggest difference is for Jordan's struggles between, that big year that he had in the minor leagues and what he's seen at the pros? Is it just because, different level competition? He basically went AA to, Major League Baseball, where, obviously the pitching is much better. Or do you think it is something that he had changed with mechanics or something that has caused him to struggle more? Because, they hear about the launch angles and stuff, and fans are like, he was doing fine. Why are we messing with him? Where do you see the issues began and have forced him to, kind of reevaluate what kind of hitter he needs to be?
So I think that what fans assume when they hear coaches talking about making swing adjustments and talking about the angle at which they attack the ball and the kind of lift that they get, is that they are trying to turn hitters into something that they're not. With Jordan, it's about trying to get him back to the hitter that he is. The reason that Jordan Walker was an attractive prospect, is an attractive prospect, the reason that the Cardinals viewed something in him is because he hits the ball hard, and when he lifts it, it turns into power, right? And so it's not a question of trying to change Jordan into something that he has not and has never been. Rather, it's a matter of, okay, we know what you are. How do we access it? How do we locate it? How do we get it to where you can repeat it? How every swing gets you into that spot. And I do think there are a couple of things that I wonder about in terms of developmental path. Number one, obviously anybody coming out of COVID is going to be in kind of a weird situation developmentally. And we know that the Cardinals, in fact, were aggressive about pushing guys through their system coming out of it. And as a result, they had, one of the worst minor league seasons ever, like a horrible minor league season in the aggregate. I think it was 22. Was just like atrocious across the board in terms of record, right? And that in part was the result of the way that they looked at that post-COVID season and how they wanted to line their guys up. But the other thing too with Jordan is that, and I don't mean this as a criticism of him, quite the opposite, right? Jordan has been like far and away naturally the best player on every team he has played on his entire life, probably until he got to AAA. Like got to the majors, I should say, in the back to AAA. But just by virtue of his natural talent and athleticism and ability, he showed up on teams and was the best guy, like for forever. And so it creates, I'm sure, a situation where adjusting to the reality of that and getting yourself into a spot where you can make the first adjustment and then the adjustment to the adjustment is hard, because my guess would be he has probably never really had to do that. Not that it hasn't been hard for him to climb through levels and to learn new leagues, but his talent is so exceeds the average that he is able, or has been able, I would just say historically, to just kind of muscle through it, right? And so there is something to learning to be a professional and learning how to get through the big leagues. I think that there is a degree of because teams are incentivized now to push players when they're so young, it creates some unreasonable expectations in terms of when a guy doesn't show up in the big leagues at 21 and he's not immediately like Gunnar Henderson, there's a freak out, right? We saw this last year even with Jackson Holiday in Baltimore. He got to the big leagues and he struggled because it's hard to hit in the big leagues. And now a guy who was 1-1 3 years ago is a bust. Jordan Walker hasn't turned 23 yet, right? Like, this is a guy who would not be out, would not at all be out of his depth, or would be wrong expectation for him to be AAA this year. But he's got to be a producer in the big leagues because of the way that things have happened in this organization. So, there is something to be said for patience. There's something to be said for allowing that to happen. All of that said, like I just said a couple of minutes ago, this is an important year for him. And this is a year that, if it goes badly, will cause us, and I think should fairly cause us, to sort of readjust what the expectations for him would look like. And so it is a balance between the two. And that is really kind of the Cardinals' point in all of this, right? They felt they have not been able to give Jordan the kind of runway you would like in the big leagues over the last 2 seasons to figure it out and work through it, and to do what, for instance, Jackson Chourio did for the Brewers last year, where he did not hit for 2 months, and then he hit. Then one day he got 150 plate appearances into the season, and the bat turned on, and now he's Jackson Chourio. So the Cardinals now are in a spot where they're going to let Jordan Walker do that. He's not getting optioned in April this year. If Jordan Walker's healthy, he's playing 6 days a week. He's going to be in the lineup. They're going to go. And he'll work through it, and he'll figure it out, and he will get himself to a level that he needs to be, or he won't. And if he won't, then that changes a lot of what happens for this team over the next 2, 3, 5 years.
At the winter warm-up this year, Jordan, obviously got to speak to the media and everything. And I noticed, at least, and I wanted to see if you picked up on the same vibes, that he seems a little more boisterous, a little more confident. Yeah. The way he just was speaking, he was very open about things he was working on and stuff. And it was quite the difference between the guy that, we've talked to over the last couple of years in interviews and stuff, where, he was kind of like, I'm just a kid, I'm going to learn. And now he's just like, no, this is what we're going to do. And I'm doing this. And did you pick up on those vibes as well, that he seems a little more mature and a little more confident?
1,000%. And I think that when you kind of look at Jordan's first 2 years, coming into spring in 23, he is the big story. He is the guy, and then he makes the team, and he is the story. And then he gets sent down, and he is the story. Like all of these things are happening at the same time, and he got a little inundated, and I think got a little withdrawn about it, right? So by the time he gets back to the big leagues, the team is miles out of the race, and he played well, but was able to sort of like settle down, get relaxed, and kind of sort of work himself through it, right? Last year, obviously, same sort of deal. Goes through it, doesn't hit, gets sent down, and it becomes the same sort of thing where not only is Jordan doubting himself probably a little bit, but he's also sort of feeling the pressure of the reality of it. And it's in my job, I have spent a lot of time kind of thinking about like what does it mean? What is a fair pressure? What is an unfair pressure? What does it mean for us to kind of create expectations for players? And I was talking. So Jordan hit a home run at home against the Pirates on September 17th. I was just looking this up because I was trying to remember the exact day. And it's a Tuesday night game. Cardinals win 3-1. Jordan hits a homer. It's the game where Lance Lynn comes back and pitches. Typically in the post game, you go into the clubhouse, you'll talk to that day's starting pitcher, you'll grab one or two position players or more. Like if there's a big play, there's a lot going on maybe. But like a 3-1 game against the Pirates in September, you're getting the starter, you're getting one position player, you're getting maybe one, and then you're done. That's what's going to happen, right? And that night, I remember distinctly we didn't ask for Jordan. I forget who we did talk to, honestly, but it wasn't Jordan. And I made a comment to a member of the team's PR staff that it was probably the first time in Jordan Walker's career that he had hit a home run and not had to do post-game media about it, right? That he was just like a guy who hit a home run and then the ball game happened. All of this is to say, like, it has been on Jordan a lot, and it's going to be again. Like this spring is going to be him, and it's going to be Nolan Gorman, and it's going to be certainly Arenado if this doesn't get cleared up. But they're going to be at the center of it, right? So these are all things to keep in mind. But all of this is to say, the version of Jordan that we saw at the winter warm-up is a version that I think that whether by circumstance or by choice, he had kind of withheld for a better part of the last year and a half. And I think it's encouraging that he feels comfortable being in a spot where he can kind of let that out again.
Yeah, agreed. And to remind people, just like you said, he's not even 23 yet. We know that he's been around for a couple of years, but he has been a kid this whole time. And I personally going into a new job, just trying to, keep it like, think about it as normal people stuff. Like when you go into it and, there's all these other people who have been in that room for so many years, it's very easy to just kind of sit back and not be who you normally are, which can affect what's going on with you mentally trying to do your job, which
right.
is something I think might have happened to, Jordan Walker, and maybe even Nolan Gorman in these times where, there's a veteran presence among this Cardinals clubhouse over the last couple of years. It wasn't them. It wasn't their clubhouse. And I feel like, when I watch that, or even like a Dylan Carlson, it never seems like the tools aren't there. It just always seems like it's kind of a mental thing and that they're,
sure.
they're not feeling confident and stuff. And that's just my outside observation. So we're going to talk more with Jeff. I want to get your thoughts on the stuff going on with Jim Edmonds, and then we've got some questions from the fans about the rotation and whether or not a right-handed hitting outfielder would be in the future for the Cardinals if something gets done with Nolan Arenado. More with Jeff Jones coming up next on Locked On Cardinals. Now, I love going to live events. I'm sure you do too. Playoff games, nothing like it. It's extremely special, whether or not it's an NFL game or Major League Baseball, NHL, NBA. You know how it is with the college basketball tournament in March. Like, it's nuts. And, we've got you got the Chiefs and you've got the Eagles going on in the big game this year. And when you need tickets to any sort of event, no matter how big it is, even a playoff game, the Gametime app is where you need to go to get your seats because it is the easiest way to find seats that you want. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets even easier, if you can believe it, because it filters out all the fluff and all the seats that you're really not all that interested in. They might be available, but those aren't the places you want to be. They're not the sections, they're not the rows, whatever the case may be. And that way you're not wasting time searching through thousands of tickets, and it only breaks it down to give you the ones that you personally want to see. Now, the Blues obviously had a tough loss last night on the home ice. Overtime to the Oilers. Connor McDavid is an absolute cheat code. I don't know how anybody stops him. But you've got the defending champion Florida Panthers in town on Thursday. Tickets are as low as $14 right now on the Gametime app. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you again for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen today. For your second listen, I encourage you to go find Locked On MLB. Sully is your host, covering all the teams this offseason, even the Cardinals, who I believe are the last team to make any sort of free agent move whatsoever. They're the only ones who haven't done that yet. You can find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Jeff Jones from the Belleville News-Democrat joining us here today. Jimmy Edmonds, want to hit this real quick. We've covered it the last couple days. We don't have to get too in-depth on it, but kind of stirred up a hornet's nest among the fans on Monday when he was on one-on-one at ESPN's show the morning after, talking about not coming back to the booth, his discontent with doing the broadcast stuff. Wasn't that much fun anymore. And then he made comments about the Cardinals organization and that not being fun to be around anymore, and how he had some issues with the way the alumni were being treated. What were your thoughts on what Jimmy had to say? Was all of this like new knowledge to you, or was this stuff that, it's kind of been simmering underneath the surface a bit?
Well, so before I answer that question, let me ask you kind of a nuts and bolts question.
Sure.
With your viewership, your people who listen to you, do you feel like you get more folks watch on YouTube or listen to the podcast audio?
It differs, really. Like sometimes there's big videos that'll go off and go crazy, but on a normal, everyday basis, usually the audio.
Okay, well, that's good to know, because now I can't just roll my eyes and go on to the next thing. That's my big joke. Look, like, the Cardinals have had organizational problems for a number of years that has been well reported. I'm not going to deny that, because I've lived it. I have seen it. I have reported on it. Of course they do. They cut people during COVID. They've been scrambling to catch up. That's like the entire offseason is all these guys they're hiring now. Do I think any of that has anything remotely to do with Jim Edmonds getting his feeling? I don't at all. I think that people not wanting to hang out and talk to Jim is about Jim and is not about anything else. I think that Jim yakking about how there are no Hall of Famers in uniform down there was interesting, because I sat and talked to Ozzie Smith in his uniform for like 45 minutes for a story I worked on last year. Willie McGee is there all the time. Izzy is there. Ryan Ludwick is on the Cardinals Hall of Famer, but he works there. Bernard Gilkey works there. Like, I get that I get that that's not Bob Gibson and Lou Brock. These are guys who are there and guys who are involved. And I think this is a really good point. I'm not going to put them on blast because I wouldn't want to stick them out. But a friend of mine, somebody I work with, said to me this week, does Jimmy think that Gibby and Lou and Red and those guys had to get begged to show up, or did they just show up and then they figured it out among them? If Jimmy is so concerned about having a voice and a place in the organization, he's free to show up, right? Like, and I'm sure they'll let him in. And I don't think that the mean old security guard down at Jupiter who wouldn't let him in the clubhouse, number one, that doesn't happen unless somebody told that person to make that happen. And maybe, who that somebody is, who can say, I don't know, because Jim went out of his way to talk about how great he thinks Mo and Ollie and the DeWitts are, so I don't know who Jim is that mad about. But also, like, it would never occur to Jim that the problem might be Jim. It just would never occur to him. And so I don't know what to say about most of it, because most of it is like, yeah, man, I don't have that same perspective as him. Now, no one's asking me into the cage, and no one wants me to talk about hitting either. But I think a lot of what Jim is talking about is about Jim. And if he's got problems with how Bally is run, look, he wouldn't be the first person to tell me that some of the higher executives at Bally, or now FanDuel, then Bally, have their hands in deposits that shouldn't have their hands in, and that there was a lot of national look down on a local market without maybe a lot of understanding about that market. That being said, while I don't know anything about putting on a TV broadcast, I got a pretty good idea that if you show up at the ballpark an hour before first pitch, you probably missed the production meeting. And so there probably are some things with the broadcast. They're going to feel disorganized to you if you didn't bother to show up for the meetings which organized the broadcast. That is sort of how I feel about it.
All right. And that is one thing I did continue to bring up. I'm like, please understand this is one guy's perspective.
Right.
Other people aren't, he can't speak for everybody. So unless we hear from other people, we can't really say like, oh, this is exactly how it is. And this is Jimmy speaks the truth.
Two things can be true at once. The Cardinals have had organizational brain drain that has hurt them because talented and committed people don't work there anymore. And also, Jim's a pain in the butt and nobody wants to deal with it.
All right, well, let's talk about a different pain in the butt. How about actually having 6 healthy starters, Jeff? The idea of a 6-man rotation is something that I've gotten a lot of questions about. You've got Gray, Fetty, Palante, Michaelis, Matz, and McGreevy. All right now are healthy. Odds are that won't happen, that it won't stay that way. Odds are one or more will get hurt at some point this season because that's just what happens. But is that something, in your opinion, that the Cardinals might or should toy with? Or is it just inevitable that one of them goes to the bullpen? And if so, should it be Steven Matz or should it be Michael McGreevy? What do you think?
So there are a number of things there. I'll start with, I don't think it should be Michael McGreevy. I think Michael McGreevy should be in the rotation in St. Louis or in Memphis. And however that works out is however it works out. But I think he's a guy who they want to start for them, and I don't think they need to yank him around. He should be starting whether it's here or whether it's there. In terms of a 6-man rotation, that's, I'm sure, going to be discussed during spring. I will say that it would surprise me a great deal. It would be a pretty big change on the way that they look about things. I know that they have in the past put a decent amount of value on schedules for guys and sort of keeping things in a more predictable way, and also generating, the right kind of innings for guys, and also, frankly, having the roster flexibility. I don't necessarily believe that a team needs to be able to use 8 relievers every night, but major league managers do kind of trend in that direction. And also, and I think it's fair to point out too that with a 6-man rotation, I think there would be some expectation that it would require more work from the bullpen because some of those spots are maybe not going to be as strong as you would like them to be. And so to put more on the bullpen while simultaneously taking a body out of it does not, to me, look like the way that you find success with that. I think that, like you said, it's February 5th. Everyone is healthy today, as far as we know.
Yeah.
Who knows what that looks like the first time we talk to Ollie 5 days from now? Who knows what it looks like a week, 2, a month from now? The odds of them getting through spring. And I went back to try to find this the other day and did not succeed because I could not go back far enough to find one. The last time the Cardinals broke camp with the 5 guys in their rotation that they thought were going to be in their rotation to start the year, it has been a long, long time since actually the anticipated 5 broke, right? So something's going to happen, and we just don't know yet what it is. And, you just have to hope that it's not too serious. If the stars were to align, and if the 6 guys that you named all kind of get through spring healthy, I do think that they will be willing to let McGreevy compete with, say, Matz for a starting rotation spot. And if McGreevy were to win that spot, it would not necessarily shock me to see Matz end up in the bullpen. I think that is a totally reasonable possibility. I don't know that they are necessarily committed to, for instance, give Miles Michaelis 30 starts no matter what. I think that if Miles Michaelis looks like he looked last year, I don't know how far into the year that they would get before they would re-examine that, but I don't think it would be particularly far. It's a different situation, obviously, with a guy on an expiring contract versus a guy who has a year still to come, a guy who you offered out this winter who said, no, I want to stay. These things all kind of change that dynamic and make them a little more willing to maybe make that change if it should reveal itself as necessary. And also, again, Eric Fetty was really good last year. He was really good in Korea. He has one really good season in the big leagues, and it was last year's, right? So maybe it looks the same this year as it did last year, and maybe it doesn't, and they're able to be flexible. There are going to be innings available. There are definitely going to be innings because they have not filled anything outside of what they had internally, so there are going to be innings. And I think that they're going to give guys opportunities. I think that McGreevy is first in line for that. Even even ahead of Liberatore, for instance, McGreevy is definitely first in line for those cracks in the rotation. And then we'll just sort of see how it goes.
One final question for you before we let you go. The Cardinals seem to be, and this was from a listener, I forgot where the name went, but the Cardinals seem to be left-handed heavy again in the outfield. If something does end up getting done with Arenado, do you see there being a chance that the team will look at signing a right-handed hitting outfielder? Because there's a lot of people who are like, hey, Harrison Bader, our old friend, is still out there. Do you think that's something that could happen if the deal with Nato gets done?
I do, yeah. I think that is entirely possible. A guy who I wrote about at this point, I don't even know, 3-4 months ago, as like a low cost fit for the Cardinals this winter is Garrett Hampson. He is still on the free agent market. That's a right-handed hitter. He can play center. He can play short. He's a good defender. He's a speedy guy. A guy like that would make all the sense in the world. I mean, Bader honestly makes a degree of sense if this is a place that he would be interested in coming on a 1-year deal. Obviously, a guy who's familiar to the clubhouse, a guy who you would expect to be a flip at the deadline. I don't know what that looks like. It was 1 year and $10 million from the Mets last year. He didn't really hit it all last year, so I would be kind of surprised if he got to the same level financially. But even at like 5 or 7, that seems to be probably more than they would want to put in to that spot. Just sort of looking on the list of guys here, like primarily if it's right-handed hitting outfielder, you're going to want it to be someone who plays center. So, your Kevin Pillars and your Michael A. Taylors on the veteran end of that. If you wanted to go young, there's really not like Nick Senzel, I guess, is still a free agent. Manny Margot is only third. There are guys that there's nobody out there who you're going to get in free agency who you're going to be like super excited about, right? But that's part of the deal. And also consider the possibility too that Arenado, in fact, be moved. They could bring back a roster player in that move. Like I'm not talking about Tristan Casas, but I'm talking about a guy who you could see as a viable roster player just as part of that larger package.
All right. Well, once again, Jeff Jones from the Belleville News Democrat here today. Find his work at bnd.com. Make sure you follow him on Twitter, X at Jeff Jones. Heading out to the sunny days of Florida here really, really soon. So safe travels, my friend. We hope to talk to you real soon. And thank you guys for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen every day. If you haven't already, please give us a follow as well on Twitter, X, and at LO_Cardinals and at JD Sports Radio. Like, subscribe on YouTube, and help our channel and love for the Cardinals grow. You guys are the best fans in baseball for a reason, and we will see you next time on Locked On Cardinals. Thank you, Jeff, for everything.
You're welcome. And by the way, before we stop, real quick, the Twins just signed Harrison Bader. So cross out. As we're wrapping up, I tabbed over. So
all right, Twinkies are getting Bader. All right, maybe Randall Grichuk if we're looking for former Cardinals. I don't know if he's still. I think he's still.
Diamondbacks signed him last night.
Oh, they got it. All right,
it's former Cardinal.
Garrett Hampson, come on down.
You know who's still a free agent and fits is Paul DeYoung.
Paul DeYoung is still out there. Keep an eye out. All right, thank you, Jeff.
See you guys.